She was the face of a generation. A global icon. A woman whose beauty stopped people in their tracks and whose name became forever tied to glamour, freedom, and rebellion. Brigitte Bardot wasn't just a movie star, she was a symbol of everything bold and untamed in the 1950s and 60s. But behind the camera flashes, beneath the headlines and adoration, was a story far more complicated and far more human than the world ever saw. At just 15, Bardot stepped into the spotlight. By 20, she had become an international sensation. Her films turned her into a sex symbol, but that label came with a heavy price. Fame wasn't always kind, and neither was the world watching her every move. She wasn't just admired, she was judged, misunderstood, and often trapped by the very image that made her famous. From the glamorous sets of Paris to the quiet corners where she tried to escape it all, Bardot lived two lives, one the world thought they knew, and one she rarely shared. This is not just a story about stardom. It's about what happens when a young woman becomes a legend too fast, and what that kind of pressure can do to a person. It's about the choices she made, the battles she fought, on screen and off, and the moments that nearly broke her. Loved by millions, criticized by many, and still impossible to ignore. So what really happened to Brigitte Bardot? Why did she walk away from everything she built? And what does she have to say now, after all these years in silence? Stay with us, because the truth behind Brigitte Bardot's story is more unexpected, more emotional, and more revealing than anyone ever imagined. Brigitte Bardot was born in Paris in 1934, into a strict, upper-class French family. From the very beginning, she never quite fit the mold of what was expected. Her parents envisioned a quiet life for her, refined, respectable, traditional. But Bardot was restless. As a teenager, she trained as a ballerina, and that's where everything began to change. The grace, the beauty, it was impossible to ignore. A single photo shoot when she was just 15 years old caught the eye of a magazine editor, and suddenly, the quiet girl from Paris was on the cover of Elle. That one cover would start a chain of events that would launch her into superstardom. She didn't chase fame. It came to her like a tidal wave. At just 18, she married French director Roger Vadim, and by 21, she starred in And God Created Woman, a film that made her an international sensation overnight. The world saw Brigitte Bardot as fearless, sensual, and carefree. But off-camera, she struggled with the expectations that came with that image. People didn't just admire her, they expected her to stay exactly how they imagined her. Always beautiful, always bold, never vulnerable. But Bardot was deeply sensitive. She often felt trapped in a role she never asked for. Directors, photographers, the press, they all wanted her to play a version of herself. The glamorous temptress. The untouchable goddess. There was little room for the real woman behind the eyes. The pressure was suffocating. And though she smiled for the cameras, she was quietly slipping into a world of anxiety, heartbreak, and isolation. She began to pull away from the industry even while it kept pulling her in. The fame, the rumors, the relationships, everything was out in the open, but no one truly saw her. And the more she tried to take control of her life, the more the media spun it into scandal. Was she difficult? Was she unstable? Or was she simply trying to protect what little peace she had left? As the headlines grew louder and her public image more complicated, Bardot made a decision that shocked the world. But before we get there, we need to understand just how deep her struggle went, and why walking away may have been the only way to survive. The more famous Brigitte Bardot became, the less control she had over her own life. Everywhere she went, crowds followed. Cameras flashed. Journalists waited for her to slip, to say something controversial, to do something they could turn into a headline. Fame wasn't a dream anymore, it was a cage. And inside it was a woman who was quietly falling apart. Bardot began to suffer from intense emotional exhaustion. The pressure to always perform, always please, always appear perfect, it was relentless. Behind closed doors, she battled with depression and moments of deep loneliness. But no one wanted to hear about that. They just wanted the star. Her relationships were constantly in the spotlight, and most of them ended under public scrutiny. She married 4 times, but the truth is, love never came easy for her. She often admitted she felt misunderstood, even by those closest to her. Some said she was too wild, others too fragile. The truth lived somewhere in between. With every heartbreak, the media added fuel to the fire, painting her as unstable, emotional, even reckless. But what they ignored was how fame had worn her down, how the world she helped create was slowly breaking her spirit. As her mental health declined, Bardot began to speak out more, and that's when the controversy really started. She wasn't afraid to share her opinions, and not everyone liked what she had to say. The public that once adored her began to turn. Some accused her of being out of touch. Others said she was simply tired of pretending. Whatever the reason, the warm spotlight she once stood in had now turned harsh and cold. At the same time, Bardot's connection to cinema began to fade. The roles became repetitive, the scripts predictable. She didn't want to keep playing the same woman the world thought she was. She wanted out, but there was no easy way to leave something that had consumed her entire identity. The film industry didn't just make her famous. It defined her. Walking away wasn't just a career decision, it was an act of survival. But what pushed her to finally cut ties with the spotlight? What was the moment that made her say, enough? That breaking point, when everything came crashing down, is still to come. By the late 1960s, Brigitte Bardot had become more than just an actress, she was a cultural phenomenon. But that fame had taken its toll. Every move she made, every word she spoke, became fuel for controversy. The media had turned from admiration to obsession, and Bardot could no longer tell where the performance ended and where her real self began. She was still starring in films, still appearing in magazines, but her heart was no longer in it. The spotlight had grown too bright, and the noise too loud. Inside, she was unraveling. The pressure to always look perfect, to always be desirable, was relentless. She once said that her beauty felt like a curse, a mask she couldn't take off, even when it was destroying her. She didn't feel seen as a human being anymore. She felt like an object, something owned by the public. People judged her personal choices without ever understanding her pain. They didn't know about the breakdowns, the sleepless nights, the desperate need to find peace. She tried to escape the cycle by taking breaks from the screen. But each time she returned, the weight of expectation crushed her a little more. She felt torn between the world that made her and the person she was trying to become. The industry didn't allow for change, and the public wasn't ready for the softer, more private version of Brigitte Bardot. They still wanted the fantasy. Then came a moment that changed everything. It wasn't one big event, but a series of small cracks that finally broke her from the inside. A string of deeply personal losses, public criticism, and emotional isolation pushed her to the edge. She began to question everything, why she started, what she was giving up, and what she truly wanted out of life. The tension between the world's image of her and the woman she really was became unbearable. She didn't recognize herself anymore. The face in the mirror was still beautiful, still iconic, but the soul behind it was tired, aching, and desperate for silence. Everyone thought they knew Brigitte Bardot. But they had no idea what was happening when the cameras stopped rolling. And just when the world thought they had her figured out, she vanished. Without warning, without apology. But what happened in those final days before she walked away? What made her finally break free, and what price did she pay for it? The answer is more unexpected than anyone imagined. The world was stunned when Brigitte Bardot walked away from fame. No farewell film, no staged goodbye. One moment she was everywhere, on posters, in gossip columns, in the dreams of millions, and the next, she was gone. Most assumed she simply needed peace, a quiet life far from the chaos of the cameras. But what very few knew was that Bardot wasn't just escaping the spotlight. She was running from something much deeper, and far more personal. After stepping back from cinema in the early 1970s, Bardot vanished into the hills of Saint-Tropez, settling in a private estate where she could finally breathe. But peace didn't come easy. The silence she thought she craved brought with it an overwhelming sense of emptiness. For someone who had been adored, followed, and constantly surrounded by people, the sudden quiet was jarring. And then came the letters. Not from fans, but from people who felt betrayed. Viewers, journalists, even past lovers, some claimed she had abandoned the world that made her. Others accused her of turning her back on feminism, cinema, and even France. The woman who had once been idolized was now facing a different kind of fame, infamy. She was no longer being celebrated, she was being picked apart. But then came a twist no one saw coming. Just when the world had accepted that Bardot had faded into private life, she re-emerged, not on screen, but on a different kind of stage. She began speaking publicly, not about films or fashion, but about causes. And her words weren't soft. She was direct, emotional, and unfiltered. Some admired her raw honesty. Others were outraged by it. The woman who once graced the covers of fashion magazines was now at the center of social and political firestorms. Brigitte Bardot had become controversial in an entirely new way. She used her fame to fight for animal rights, something deeply personal to her. But even in this new chapter, her voice stirred up more backlash than applause. Some labeled her opinions extreme. Others said she was out of touch. She was fined multiple times for statements that sparked public debate. The press that once adored her now printed headlines filled with criticism. And yet, she didn't stop. If anything, she became more defiant. This wasn't the Brigitte Bardot the world remembered. This was a woman hardened by experience, shaped by rejection, and unwilling to be silenced again. The second act of her life was nothing like the first, and for many, it was even more shocking. How did the symbol of beauty and grace become one of the most polarizing figures in French public life? And what was really driving her beneath all the controversy? What no one realized was that Bardot's battle wasn't just with the media, or with society, it was with herself. The person she had been, the person she was becoming, and the haunting memories she still carried. The biggest twist wasn't just her sudden disappearance or her outspoken return. It was the hidden pain that had never fully gone away. And as the world watched from a distance, wondering who she truly was, Brigitte Bardot was still searching for that answer herself. For years, Brigitte Bardot had lived on her own terms, first as a star the world couldn't stop watching, then as a recluse who shocked everyone by refusing to play along. Her public transformation from beloved icon to divisive activist had left many wondering what was left of the woman they once adored. But even as she stirred controversy, Bardot had found something she had never truly experienced during her years in the spotlight: conviction. She no longer cared about pleasing anyone. The mask had finally come off. And yet, the weight of her past never truly let go. In private, Bardot often revisited old journals and letters, silent witnesses to a life few ever really understood. She once said in an interview that the world had taken everything from her but given her nothing real in return. It was a rare glimpse into the deep scars she still carried. Then, just when the world believed they had seen the last of her surprises, something else happened. On her 80th birthday, Bardot quietly released a handwritten letter to the public. No press tour, no interviews, just a letter honest, raw, and filled with regrets. In it, she admitted that behind all the fire and defiance was a lifetime of pain she had never truly healed from. She wrote of fame as a beautiful prison, and of longing for a different kind of life, one filled with real connection, not flashing lights and applause. She even expressed sorrow for the hurt her words may have caused in recent years, saying, "I spoke too loudly because for too long, I was never heard." The letter went viral. It wasn't scandalous or political, it was human. People who had once judged her began to see her in a new light. Not as a headline, not as a symbol, but as a woman who had lived too many lives in one lifetime. And just when it seemed the story had finally come full circle, a final twist emerged. Bardot had been quietly writing a memoir for over a decade, documenting everything she had never told anyone, not the press, not her fans, not even her family. The manuscript, locked away in her Saint-Tropez home, is still unpublished. Its pages are said to hold the full truth, the real story of the woman behind the myth. Whether the world will ever read it remains uncertain. But one thing is clear, Brigitte Bardot's story isn't over. It never was. Brigitte Bardot never needed a grand farewell to leave her mark. She had already done that just by being herself, flawed, brilliant, impulsive, and fiercely independent. Her story wasn't meant to follow a perfect arc. It was messy, complicated, and very human. She didn't just break the mold of what it meant to be a woman in the spotlight, she shattered it. And though her choices were often questioned, there was one thing no one could deny: she lived on her own terms, no matter the cost. The unpublished memoir still remains a mystery. Whether the world ever reads Bardot's final truth or not, the clues she's left behind over the years paint a picture of someone who never fully made peace with the life she was given. Fame gave her the world but asked too much in return. It gave her beauty and power but stole her privacy, her mental peace, and pieces of her identity. In the end, she retreated not because she stopped caring, but because she wanted to finally live, not perform. Today, Brigitte Bardot lives quietly in the south of France, surrounded by animals, far from the noise of flashing cameras. She has turned her focus to compassion, dedicating her later years to protecting those without a voice. Her foundation continues to fight for animal rights, echoing the strength she once used to fight for herself. While some still debate her choices, others see a woman who was brave enough to walk away from everything for the sake of her soul. Her story is a reminder that the brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows. That behind even the most glamorous life, there can be silent battles no one sees. And that being true to yourself, even when the world resists it, might be the hardest and most powerful choice of all. Brigitte Bardot didn't just vanish, she evolved. And in doing so, she left behind more than just films and photographs. She left behind a legacy of complexity, of contradiction, and above all, of truth.